Hello my very dear students, we are recording about the branches of maxillary artery. So far we have recorded the branches of maxillary artery in the mandibular part, then we recorded about the branches of maxillary artery in the pterygoid part. Now we are recording about the last part of the maxillary artery, that is the pterygopalatine part, the branches of maxillary artery in the pterygopalatine part, right? Let's focus on our lecture. Branches of maxillary artery. Branches and pterygopalatine part. Okay friends, if you haven't watched those previous lectures, go and watch those, because first you have to complete those parts, then you will understand this last part of this maxillary artery. The first was the mandibular part and the branches of maxillary artery in mandibular part. Then there was the pterygo part, right? Pterygo part. So if you have a clear concept about these two parts, then you can easily understand the branches in the pterygopalatine part, right? So the first part in the first branch which arises from the pterygopalatine part of this maxillary artery is the descending palatine arteries, right? The first one are descending palatine arteries. Clear friends? Okay, so these descending palatine arteries arise from maxillary artery. Everyone knows maxillary artery in pterygopalatine part. Pterygopalatine part. Very good. Right. Then this artery divides into greater and lesser palatine arteries, right? It divides into greater and lesser palatine arteries. Clear friends? Okay, greater and lesser palatine arteries mostly supply the palate, right? Mostly supply oxygenated blood to the palate. So they are divided into greater palatine and lesser palatine arteries. We will see all these also in the diagram, don't you guys worry. The next branch which arises from this maxillary artery in the pterygopalatine part, that is the posterior superior alveolar artery, right? Posterior superior alveolar artery, right? As its name suggests, it is the for example, here we have our upper jaw teeth, right? For example, this is a very simplified example, right? So this is the posterior to this part, superior from upper side, alveolar means this jaw, right? So posterior jaw or posterior alveolar is supplied this posterior superior alveolar artery, right friends? Okay, this artery supplies the maxillary teeth. Mostly this artery supplies maxillary teeth. Reference posterior superior alveolar artery. We will see, we are concerned with these branches of maxillary artery, so we have to write their names and have some concept about to which parts of the body do they supply, right? The third branch which arises from this maxillary artery in the pterygopalatine part is the pharyngeal artery. Pharyngeal artery, right? Okay, Pharyngeal artery supplies mostly the pharynx. It mostly supplies blood to pharynx and roof of the nose, right? Roof of nose. Clear, friends? So it mostly supplies the pharynx and the roof of the nose. The fourth artery which arises from the maxillary artery in the pterygopalatine part, that is the infraorbital artery, right? Infraorbital artery is another branch of the maxillary artery in the pterygopalatine part. Infraorbital artery. This infraorbital artery passes to, there is an infraorbital fissure, right? So it passes forward. Right, through infraorbital fissure. Through infraorbital fissure, right? Then what happens to it? Then this artery, there is nerve to the which is called infraorbital nerve, and this artery along with that nerve emerges to the face, right? So infraorbital artery emerges, right, along with infraorbital nerve to face. Clear? Now what does it supply? It supplies blood. It supplies oxygenated blood to, listen carefully, friends, whenever this artery emerges, it gives off a branch which is called the anterior superior alveolar artery, right? And this branch gives blood to the teeth, right? To teeth. So the first we should know that the infraorbital artery is responsible to supply blood to teeth of upper jaw, maxillary teeth. The second thing that we should know that this artery supplies is, whenever this artery goes forward, it supplies, here is our nose, for example, here is the nose, right? So this artery supplies the lateral parts of the nose, okay? Then it also gives a branch to the upper lip, a very small branch to the upper lip, and some branches to the cheeks also. So we say that this artery supplies blood to teeth, maxillary teeth, to lateral part of nose, lateral part of nose, right, friends? Lateral part of nose, and cheeks, right, and some part of upper lip, a little bit, right? So it is responsible to supply oxygenated blood to maxillary teeth, to lateral part of the nose, to cheeks, and to the upper lip. This is infraorbital artery, the fourth branch of the maxillary artery in the pterygopalatine part, right? Now the fifth branch which arises from this maxillary artery in the pterygopalatine part, that is the anterior superior alveolar artery. Anterior superior alveolar artery. Clear, friends? Okay, there was posterior superior alveolar artery, then we have anterior superior alveolar artery, so it must be supplying the alveolar teeth of the maxilla to the alveola of the maxillary teeth, right? So anterior superior alveolar artery supplies maxillary teeth. It supplies maxillary teeth anteriorly, right? Anteriorly. Okay, Then the next branch which arises from this maxillary artery in the pterygopalatine part, that is the middle superior alveolar artery. Middle superior alveolar artery. Reference. In some cases, this artery directly arises from this the branch which is given by the infraorbital artery, right? So we discuss this artery separately here. So middle superior alveolar artery, it also supplies maxillary teeth. Maxillary teeth in middle. It's so simple, right? Then there is a branch which is called here we have covered posterior superior alveolar artery, anterior superior alveolar artery, middle superior alveolar artery, and then there is a branch which moves towards the pterygoid canal, that is called artery of pterygoid canal. Artery of pterygoid canal. This artery is responsible to supply mostly blood to the pharynx and tympanic cavity, right? It supplies blood to pharynx and tympanic cavity. Right, friends? Very good. These are the arteries which, and the last artery that arises from this maxillary artery in the pterygopalatine part, that is the spinopalatine artery, the last artery, the seventh one. Spinopalatine artery. Dear friends, spinopalatine artery. This spinopalatine artery, when it arises, it passes through the spinopalatine foramen and enters to the nasal cavity, right? So it passes through spinopalatine foramen, clear, and enters to nasal cavity, right? And it enters to nasal cavity. Then it gives posterior lateral nasal branches, right? Then it gives posterior and lateral branches, right? So it gives posterior and lateral branches in nasal cavity. Clear, friends? Okay, then this artery, when it gives branches, posterior, anterior and lateral branches, then it further goes a little inferior surface. It goes into the inferior surface of the sphenoid bone, right? So then artery moves or goes in inferior surface of sphenoid bone, in inferior surface of sphenoid bone. That's why we call it spinopalatine, right? Sphenoid bone. And when it goes to the inferior surface of sphenoid bone, then this artery gives small branches which are called the posterior septal arteries. Then it gives posterior septal branches. Posterior septal branches, right? This was a little detail about this spinopalatine artery. Clear, friends? Now these were the 7 branches of the maxillary artery in the pterygopalatine part. The first one, descending palatine artery, posterior superior alveolar artery, pharyngeal artery, infraorbital artery, anterior superior alveolar artery, middle superior alveolar artery, artery of the pterygoid canal, and the spinopalatine artery. Now friends, we have covered all the arteries which arise from the maxillary arteries. 7 arteries are here, and we have covered about 9 more arteries. So the total number of arteries we have discussed which arise from the maxillary artery. Now let me show all these arteries also in the diagram so that you could clearly understand these branches of the maxillary artery. Right, dear friends, look carefully. This was our first diagram. Right, let me write here as 1. Right, this was our first diagram. In our first diagram we discussed the arteries which arise from the maxillary artery in the mandibular part. Right, this was our first lecture. Then here is our second lecture, that we discussed about the arteries which arise from maxillary artery in the pterygoid part. Right, the mesenteric artery, deep temporal artery, pterygoid artery, and the buccinator artery. Right, so 4 from 8, 5 here, total 9, and 7, 16 arteries arise from this maxillary artery. Right, and now let me put, friends, in this diagram I am putting all these arteries together so that we will see the whole sketch that we can draw for to explain the maxillary artery. Right, friends, now let us start and see all these branches together. Right, friends, okay, this is our external carotid artery. Right, and at the level of neck of the mandible, this artery gives off a branch, and this branch is called the, you all know, this branch is called maxillary artery, and the branch which is going forward and superiorly, this is called the superficial temporal artery. We are not concerned with that. Right, now let me put all these branches here. From here, friend, there was a very small artery arising. Right, this was our first artery. Then from this point there was another second artery. So this first artery was the deep auricular artery. Right, this is deep auricular artery. Right, okay, let me a little zoom it. Okay, then there was this second branch, and this second branch was called anterior tympanic artery. Anterior tympanic artery. Clear, friends? Okay, then there was another branch which was going through the foramen spinosum. Right, and this artery was called the middle meningeal artery. Right, this is our middle meningeal artery. Middle meningeal artery. Right, then there was another branch which was passing through the foramen ovale, and this was the accessory meningeal artery. Right, this is our accessory meningeal artery. Meningeal artery. Right, then there was another branch here, and which was passing through the mandibular foramen. Right, and this artery was called as the inferior alveolar artery, and it left the mental foramen and made the mental artery. Right, so this is our inferior alveolar artery. Right, and Then we had used the black color to move forward, and this is our alveolar maxillary artery. Furthermore, and from here there was a branch, a very small branch, right? And this branch was called the mesenteric artery, right? This is mesenteric artery, right? And then there was a small branch which was coming down, that was the pterygoid artery. And this branch was coming down, right? This is the pterygoid artery. Pterygoid artery, right? And from here there were further two small branches. These two small branches, and these were the deep temporal branches, right? Deep temporal branches, arteries. Deep temporal arteries, right friends. And then there was another big branch, as you can see here. It runs obliquely forward and gives off small branches. This branch was called the buccinator artery, right? This was our buccinator artery, right? These four were the branches in the pterygoid part. Now let's move forward and use green color to represent the other branches, right? So the other branches that we know up to now, we discussed. This is our maxillary artery, again in the Pterygopalatine part, right? So from it, the first branch which arises is the I have written here descending palatine artery, right? So here is our first branch, and this branch is the descending palatine artery, and you know that this descending palatine artery divides into lesser and greater palatine arteries, so we divide it like this, right? Okay, so let me name it. This is our descending palatine artery, right? And this one is the greater palatine, and this one is the lesser palatine artery, right friends? Very good. This was descending palatine artery. Now moving forward, there is another branch which arises from this maxillary artery like this, and this one is the posterior superior alveolar artery, right? This is the posterior superior alveolar artery. Let me name it here. Posterior superior alveolar artery, right? Posterior superior alveolar artery, we done with it. Then there is a third branch, a very small branch, and this branch is called the pharyngeal branch, right? This is the third small branch, and this is called the pharyngeal artery, right? This is our pharyngeal artery. Pharyngeal artery. I hope you can see this diagram in the video clearly, right? This is pharyngeal artery. Then further moving forward a little bit, here is an artery arises, and this artery moves through this orbital foramen, right, and exits from here like this, right? So this is infraorbital artery, clear? And it gives a branch here, small branch here, clear friends? And this artery is the, as I told you, this is infraorbital artery, infraorbital artery, right? And this branch which is given by the infraorbital artery is the anterior superior alveolar artery, right? There is posterior superior alveolar, this is anterior superior alveolar artery. I hope you are making sense of it. Right. Then further moving forward, here is another small branch which separates from this artery, this one, right? This small branch. This is the artery to the pterygoid canal, right? This is the artery of pterygoid canal. You can write it here. Artery to pterygoid canal. Right, friends, artery to pterygoid canal. Then if we move further, a little bit forward, we can see that this artery becomes as spinopalatine artery, right? This is our spinopalatine artery. Spinopalatine artery. Okay, dear friends, so spinopalatine artery, and I have discussed about it, that enters the nasal cavity and it divides into lateral branches and posterior branches, and they mostly supply posterior the septum of the nasal cavity and other parts of the nasal cavity, right? So this was about the branches of the maxillary artery. I hope you are making sense of this diagram. Also, I have used 3 colors just to represent the branches of maxillary artery in different areas, right? The mandibular area part, the pterygoid part, and the pterygopalatine part. So friends, this was about the branches of maxillary artery. We have recorded these lectures and we are done with them, right? So friends, if you like our lectures, please subscribe our channel, give us some favors so that we can develop our lectures according to your choices. And till then, enjoy your time. Allah Hafiz.